The house lights dimmed at the Ohio State Fair grandstand on August 23, 1971, and 17,000 people pressed forward in their seats. The summer heat still clung to the metal bleachers, even as darkness fell over Columbus. Johnny Cash stood center stage, his black shirt already damp with sweat, his weathered Martin guitar catching the spotlight like polished gold. He had just finished Folsom Prison Blues, and the crowd was still roaring when he raised his hand for silence. But Johnny wasn't looking at the sea of faces stretching back into the Ohio night. His eyes had locked onto something in the third row, stage right. A young man on aluminum crutches was struggling to stand, trying to join the ovation. The left leg of his jeans was pinned up at the knee. His companion, an older woman who would turn out to be his mother, steadied him with practiced care. "Hold on there, friend," Johnny said into the microphone, his deep voice cutting through the noise like a blade through butter. "Don't you stand for me." The crowd began to quiet, sensing something happening. Those 17,000 people didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness one of the most extraordinary moments in music history. The young man on crutches was 24-year-old Sergeant First Class Timothy James Sullivan from Youngstown, Ohio. 6 months earlier, he had been leading a patrol through the jungles outside Pleiku when a Viet Cong mine detonated beneath his feet. The explosion took his left leg below the knee and riddled his body with shrapnel. Doctors at the field hospital counted 47 separate wounds. They gave him a 20% chance of survival. But here's what the crowd didn't know, what even Johnny didn't know yet. Timothy Sullivan had learned to play guitar in that jungle. Between patrols, between firefights, between moments of absolute terror, he had taught himself on a beat-up Yamaha that someone's girlfriend had sent from the States. Music became his escape, his sanity, his reason to make it through another day. And the voice that carried him through those endless nights was Johnny Cash. "I said, don't stand for me," Johnny repeated, and now his voice carried something different, recognition, understanding. He had seen the Purple Heart ribbon pinned to Timothy's chest, visible even from the stage. Johnny set down his guitar against the amplifier and did something his road manager, Saul Holiff, would later describe as completely unprecedented. He walked off the stage, not backstage, but down the stairs at stage right, heading straight for the third row. "Johnny, what are you doing?" Holiff hissed from the wings, but Cash kept walking. The security guards scrambled, unsure whether to follow or stay at their posts. The band, Marshall Grant on bass, W.S. Holland on drums, Bob Wooten on lead guitar, stood frozen, instruments in hand. June Carter Cash, watching from stage left, brought her hand to her mouth. The spotlight operator, a 20-year veteran named Carl Morrison, made a split-second decision that would define the moment. He swung the light to follow Johnny, illuminating his path through the crowd. Timothy Sullivan's mother, Margaret, would later tell reporters, "When I saw Johnny Cash walking toward us, I thought I was dreaming. Timothy grabbed my arm so tight I had bruises for a week." Johnny reached the third row and stood before Timothy. The young veteran's hands trembled on his crutches. Up close, Johnny could see the surgical scars running along the soldier's jawline, the slight tremor in his hands that spoke of nerve damage. "What's your name, son?" "Timothy Sullivan, sir. Sergeant First Class, 1st Cavalry Division." Johnny's jaw tightened. His own Air Force service in Germany during the Korean War had never taken him to combat, something that had haunted him for decades. He had written The Ballad of Ira Hayes and championed veteran causes, but he carried what he called the guilt of the untested. "Where?" Johnny asked simply. "Pleiku, February 14th, Valentine's Day." Johnny absorbed this detail, his dark eyes never leaving Timothy's face. "You play guitar?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, but Timothy's mother would later reveal that her son had been clutching a pick in his pocket, a nervous habit he'd developed since coming home. "A little, sir. Learned over there, your songs mostly." What happened next would be captured by a single photographer, Diana Peterson from the Columbus Dispatch, who happened to be positioned in the aisle. Her photograph would win a Pulitzer Prize. Johnny Cash turned and walked back toward the stage. But instead of climbing the stairs, he reached up and took his Martin D35 guitar from the stand. This wasn't just any guitar. This was the instrument he had played at Folsom Prison. The one he had used to record Man in Black, the guitar June had given him for their wedding. He walked back to Timothy Sullivan and held it out. "Play something." "Sir, I couldn't." "That wasn't a request, Sergeant." The entire grandstand had gone silent. 17,000 people held their breath. You could hear the distant sounds of the midway, the Ferris wheel turning, the barkers calling. But inside that grandstand, time had stopped. Timothy looked at his mother, who nodded through tears that were already streaming down her face. He carefully handed her his crutches and, balancing on his right leg, took the guitar. Marshal Grant would later say, "In 40 years of playing with John, I never saw him hand that Martin to anyone. Not June, not his children, no one." Timothy's fingers found the frets. The pick appeared in his right hand as if by magic. And then, in a voice that started as barely a whisper but grew stronger with each word, he began to sing, "I hear the train a-comin', it's rolling round the bend." His voice cracked on bend, but he kept going. His fingers, damaged by shrapnel, struggled with the chord changes, but he kept going. Sweat beaded on his forehead from the effort of standing on one leg, but he kept going. "And I ain't seen the sunshine since I don't know when." Johnny Cash stood beside him, his hands clasped in front of him like a man in prayer. June Carter Cash had come to the edge of the stage, tears flowing freely. The band members, without any signal, began to play along softly, following Timothy's tentative tempo. "I'm stuck in Folsom Prison, and time keeps dragging on." Oh, by now, some in the crowd were singing along softly, respectfully, their voices joining Timothy's in a chorus that built and built until all 17,000 people were singing, "But that train keeps a-rollin' on down to San Antone." When Timothy finished, the silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the grandstand erupted. The sound was deafening, primal, a roar that seemed to come from the very earth itself. People were crying, screaming, stamping their feet so hard the bleachers shook. But Johnny wasn't done. He took the guitar back from Timothy, but only long enough to remove the leather strap from around his own neck. This strap had his initials tooled into it, a gift from his father, Ray Cash, before he died. Johnny placed it around Timothy's neck and then put the guitar back in the young man's hands. "This is yours now," Johnny said, his voice breaking. "You earned it." "Mr. Cash, I can't. You carried music through hell, son. Music carried you back. That guitar belongs with you." The photographer Diana Peterson captured the moment Johnny Cash embraced Timothy Sullivan, the young man still balancing on one leg, the Martin guitar pressed between them. In the photograph, you can see June Carter Cash in the background, her hands over her heart. You can see Marshal Grant wiping his eyes with his sleeve. You can see Margaret Sullivan reaching for her son, her face a masterpiece of pride and pain. But here's the incredible part that didn't make it into the newspapers the next day. Johnny Cash didn't return to the stage immediately. Instead, he sat down right there in the third row, in the seat next to Margaret Sullivan. He asked for another guitar to be brought from backstage, his backup Gibson, and for the next 45 minutes, he performed his entire set from that seat in the third row. Ring of Fire had never sounded more intimate. Walk the Line became a conversation between Johnny and Timothy, with the young veteran playing along on the Martin. When they reached Man in Black, Johnny changed the lyrics on the spot. "I wear it for the thousands who have died, believing that the Lord was on their side. I wear it for another 100,000 who have died, believing that we all were on their side. And I wear it for the Timothy Sullivans, who came back on crutches but still stand tall." The concert that was supposed to end at 9:30 didn't finish until nearly 11. The Ohio State Fair officials, who would normally have shut down any show running that late, stood in the wings and let it happen. The head of security, a Vietnam veteran named Robert Patterson, was seen saluting with tears running down his face. When Johnny finally stood to leave, He faced the crowd one more time. "I want you all to remember something," he said, his voice carrying across the fairground. "We send our best to fight our wars. The least we can do is recognize them when they come home. This young man," he pointed to Timothy, "represents thousands who didn't get a hero's welcome, who came back to silence or worse. Every one of them deserves what you gave Timothy tonight." The crowd erupted again, but Johnny wasn't finished. "And Timothy, I want you to promise me something. You keep playing that guitar. You play it every day. You play it when the memories get bad. You play it when the pain feels unbearable. You play it to remember your brothers who didn't come home. And you play it to remind yourself that you did." Timothy Sullivan, balanced on his crutches now, the Martin guitar hanging from Johnny's own strap, could only nod. His mother would later say he didn't speak for the entire drive home to Youngstown. But when they got there, he went straight to his room and played guitar until sunrise. The story could end there, but life, like the best songs, always has another verse. Timothy Sullivan went on to become a music therapist at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Cleveland. He used that Martin guitar, Johnny's guitar, to help thousands of veterans find their way back from their own darkness. He founded a program called Strings of Healing that put guitars in the hands of wounded warriors across Ohio. In 1991, 20 years after that night at the Ohio State Fair, Timothy was invited to appear on stage with Johnny Cash at Carnegie Hall. This time he walked out on a prosthetic leg he had finally learned to use. This time he played Folsom Prison Blues with confidence and skill. This time, when the crowd erupted, he remained standing. Johnny introduced him to the New York audience by saying, "This is the bravest man I've ever known, not because he went to war, though that took courage, but because he came back and chose to live, really live, when dying would have been easier." When Johnny Cash died on September 12, 2003, Timothy Sullivan was invited to play at his funeral. He stood in the same Ryman Auditorium where Johnny had made history so many times and played Folsom Prison Blues on that same Martin guitar. June had died 4 months earlier, and everyone said Johnny had died of a broken heart. But Timothy knew better. He knew Johnny had died complete, having given away everything that mattered, including his guitar, to people who needed it more. That Martin D35 now sits in a glass case at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, on loan from Timothy Sullivan. The placard reads, "This guitar belonged to Johnny Cash, but it found its true owner on August 23, 1971, when Cash gave it to Purple Heart recipient Sergeant Timothy Sullivan. It represents not just music history, but the power of recognition, respect, and the healing force of human kindness." Timothy, now 76 years old, still gives talks at veterans' hospitals. He always ends with the same message: "Johnny Cash didn't just give me a guitar that night. He gave me permission to be broken and whole at the same time. He showed 17,000 people that a man on crutches could stand taller than anyone in that grandstand. And he reminded all of us that sometimes the greatest gift you can give is to truly see someone who feels invisible." The Ohio State Fair grandstand was torn down in 2004, replaced by a modern facility. But workers found something remarkable in the demolition. Carved into the wood of the third-row bench, right where Timothy Sullivan had sat, someone had written, "Johnny Cash stood here, August 23, 1971, and showed us what love looks like." The wood was preserved and now hangs in the Ohio Historical Society, a reminder that sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary summer night, with 17,000 witnesses, magic happens. A country music legend sees a wounded veteran struggling to stand and decides that recognition matters more than any show. A young man on crutches plays a borrowed guitar and finds his way back to life. And 17,000 people erupt, not just in applause, but in understanding that they've witnessed something sacred. Every year on August 23rd, Timothy Sullivan returns to the Ohio State Fair. He brings his guitar, Johnny's guitar, and plays for anyone who wants to listen. Veterans come from across the state to hear him. Some bring their own guitars. They sit in a circle where the old grandstand used to be, and they play the songs that carried them through their darkest hours. And every time, without fail, when they play Folsom Prison Blues, Timothy tells them what Johnny Cash told him that night. Music doesn't just help you survive, it reminds you why survival matters. To this day, if you ask Timothy Sullivan about that night, he'll tell you the same thing. 17,000 people didn't just erupt for me. They erupted for every veteran who ever felt forgotten. Johnny Cash knew exactly what he was doing. He turned a concert into a communion. He turned recognition into resurrection. And he turned a soldier on crutches into a man who could stand tall again. That's the power of a moment when someone truly sees you. That's the gift of recognition when you need it most. That's what happened when Johnny Cash walked off that stage, handed over his precious guitar, and reminded us all that sometimes the most profound performances happen not on stage, but in the third row, where the wounded sit, waiting for someone to notice they're still trying to stand. If this story moved you, imagine how many veterans in your own community are waiting for that same recognition. They don't need a famous guitar or a standing ovation. They just need someone to see them, to acknowledge their sacrifice, and to remind them that they matter. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And the next time you see a veteran, remember what Johnny Cash taught 17,000 people that night in Ohio. Sometimes the smallest gesture of recognition can change a life forever. What will you do today to recognize someone who deserves to be seen?